I'm Eva O, and this is the Teakink podcast. I've been a dominatrix since 2011, and I would like to spill the tea on my life. Thank you for listening. So welcome.
Thank you.
Today we have Ali.
My name's Ali Bushell. I'm a therapist based in London, and I'm also an internal family systems practitioner.
Lovely. And Ali emailed me quite a while ago, maybe almost 2 years ago now.
Is it that long?
I think
Okay.
so.
Yeah.
After you saw me on an interview with Lad Bible.
Yeah. You interviewed about what it was to be a dominatrix. You talked about, you referenced a little bit your previous career.
Mm-hmm.
It was mainly about being a dom and how that impacted your personal life, where the lines were. Yeah. And I saw that and thought, because at the time I had done some outreach work to sex workers through advertising, I really thought, oh, this is exactly the kind of person within that outreach that I would like to help. So I just thought nothing to hurt sending you an email and saying, you've moved to London. I don't know if you have a therapist or would need any support. Don't want to presume, but if you would like some, I'm sex worker allied. I've been a sex worker myself, so happy to help you if you would like to. That was actually in the subject line.
Thank you. And I didn't take you up on the offer until maybe a year later, but I definitely recommended you to a few people who were looking along the way. I don't know if they reached out. But you mentioned that you were a sex worker and that you're an ally now. But what is it about reaching out to a sex worker to offer therapy that was maybe part of what you were imagining?
It's part of my, it's part of my belief that sex work is work. It should be accorded the same respect as any other job. It serves a very meaningful role within our society. People are purchasing not just sex, but intimacy, sometimes a place to be held. As you and I sit together, actually there is a massive overlap here of the Venn diagram of what we provide in terms of holding people, offering intimacy, through an exchange of money for time. So I see it as important that the people who are providing this role have the support that they need, because just as being a therapist can sometimes be a challenge and you need your self-care, so I believe the sex workers. And it's important to me that, I believe quite strongly that if you want something doing, do it yourself, build it and they will come. If I'm not clear that there are the resources out there for sex workers, well, then I'll be the one going out trying to provide it. And that's, what I've so far tried to do.
Thank you. But I have reached out to therapists for maybe almost the entire length of my career. I was first introduced to the concept of therapy by a manager that I worked with at a brothel. And I'm not exactly sure why she mentioned this person to me, but I started there and it never even registered, I think, on the face what I did. We worked a lot on boundaries, and that was a very long time ago. But since then, I've kind of traversed a few different people. I've moved around, I've tried online, I've been in random places, and it's always a different approach. I've even met some who I didn't end up lasting with for very long, who had to research basically what I did for work. And on one hand, I'm really glad that they were interested to do that, but on the other hand, it really felt like we'd be playing a big game of catch up.
Yeah, and you're not the only person who experiences this. There are other people who exist within marginalized groups or communities who, by more mainstream individuals, are not understood. I mean, I can cite myself as a queer man. A lot of queer men go to heterosexual mainstream individuals, and there is an element of having to, it's like,
educate.
Yeah, you're having to educate the person who's helping you. So you're talking about your experience in going to sex clubs because that's a part of who you are. And then you have to hold this person's hand through getting them to understand that you're not like doing something dangerous or self-harming, and that actually it's a perfectly healthy thing to do, and even get their approval before you can even, get onto the business of what you want to talk about it. And that's something that, people who don't exist within that marginalized group don't have to do as much.
It feels, it doesn't really feel like how the exchange should be. Not what are we paying for in a sense, right?
It's not.
So it's a lot about, I guess, taking the time to find a good match.
Very much. I mean, it is very much a dating process with therapists. You have to make sure that they have the experience you need, that they have the approach that works for you. For example, do you want to sit with someone who gives you the wall of silence and you just talk at them? Some people want that. I don't think many people do. I think more therapists want to do it than clients want to. Do you want someone who's more passive, someone who's more direct, someone who's, like me, I'm quite directive in my work. There's particular modalities that might speak more to you than others. But ultimately, you have to have someone who you feel actually is interested in helping you, who cares about you, and who understands you. And if they don't fully understand you, because we never fully understand the other, that they are doing their best to understand you as much as they can. And if they've turned up and they're saying, so tell me who you are and what you do, I don't know anything about that, they haven't done enough.
And when you mentioned earlier that therapists also need to feel held.
Yeah, for sure.
What do you mean by this?
So there's work that we do that the nature of the work, the content can be quite difficult for us. There can be vicarious trauma. If you're working with someone who's very traumatized, sometimes you take a bit of that away. I mean, you need to have good boundaries to make sure that doesn't happen very much, but it happens. I mean, you have your supervision process so that your client work can be processed and you can make sure you're not taking on too much of it. It's very easy to get drawn into dynamics where if you are working with someone who maybe feels very powerless, you take on a lot of responsibility to help them in a way that actually is in the long term not very good. So you need someone to check that and observe that.
The therapist.
Yeah, that's the supervisor for you, or indeed your actual therapist, or a peer who you can talk to and be like, oh, I had to talk about this client, and they can sometimes say something to you, and you're like, oh shit, I hadn't even realized that.
Are there formal systems for this, or is it a fairly informal?
So in the UK, there's the formal system of supervision. So I'm a member of the British Association of Counsellors and Psychotherapists. That's what enables me to go onto an advertising directory here and say I am a therapist. And they do ask for my qualifications. They do ask for my membership, and they have proof of it before they can put me on. And to do that, I have to have supervision twice a month.
Okay.
So I pay a supervisor who I've been working with since I started practicing, and he and I work together. That's very useful.
I wonder if that will ever be formalized within the sex worker community.
I mean, it'd be great if it did, if there was actually some form of supervision. I mean, but it depends, because then you're starting to get a little bit into, okay, are we in a legalized profession, which then has regulation around it that requires this? Or are we in a decriminalized one that doesn't, but maybe has? I mean, the UK's therapy profession isn't formally regulated anymore. It used to be, but they sort of stripped that back. Really, we're in a wild, wild west. Like it's really quite minimal what we have to do. But yeah, there's at least that. So there's nothing preventing sex workers. For example, if there was a shift in the law that even just recognized it, and there was more like unionizing and, co-ops and things like that could say it's good practice that there be some kind of supervisor or therapist with accreditation who can say, I'm able to work with a sex worker and I have the experience and the knowledge to provide that meaningfully.
Is that an option on the directory, or do you just have to kind of Google?
It's not currently. For example, you can search for quite a lot of things in terms of specific experiences you want or specialities you want a therapist to have. Sex work, I don't believe, is one of them for the directories that I'm on. One of them, Pink Therapy, might have it, because Pink Therapy is about queer people, and that's kind of, I think it's adjacent enough that it might be there. However, there was one directory that, in terms of like types of therapy it was listing, it didn't list mine, which is internal family systems. And internal family systems is quite big now. It's new, but it's still big. And I actually had to email them and say, could you please add this to the list so I can actually tick it? And they did. So maybe it's just there's something as little as me contacting those directories and saying, I'm conscious you don't have anything that allows me to demonstrate I'm sex worker allied. Could you? So, I mean, you've just given me something that I can do.
Thank you. I'm assuming that they have things like a queer.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. And
I point out those things aren't bulletproof.
Yeah.
Someone can say,
Yeah.
oh, yeah, I work with queer people. And then you get there and actually find they're not very good at it.
Okay. And I guess, I don't know if you are able to speak about it, but when sex workers do come to you, I'm assuming there's more than myself. Are there any commonalities between what we like to talk about?
I mean, sometimes it's my job is sex work. Now, can I have therapy?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like that.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's about how the sex work is going for them, whether they want to do it, whether they want to leave it. So it kind of depends on the person, really.
Okay. It's a nuanced and individual process.
Yeah, I need to stress that I don't look at you and see a sex worker first. I see you as a person, and that's your job. In the same way that I can say I'm a therapist. I mean, it's quite central to my being for who I am, because it's something I really devoted myself to. Maybe you feel the same way, but I still think we're all people before we are any other part of our individuality.
Yeah, I think at this point in the career, I feel like becoming a sex worker and being one has really informed my understanding of the world and impacted a lot of things that I have feelings for, but I don't know if I see that title as something that's blanketing me. I don't think I'm very good at titles anyway.
No, but
again, it's different for everybody, how much they want to subscribe to that.
For sure. I mean, identity is quite multifaceted. It's quite complex. Some people need to identify with things for particular reasons. Again, I identify so strongly as a therapist because I put so much effort into being it, and it's so central to who I am in terms of wanting to help others. It's the way I help others. It's my work. I don't see it as my job. It's my work. It's quite different.
Okay.
And there might be people who are doing sex work because that's what they're doing right now, because that pays the bills and that will get them through where they are. And I think that's what a lot of people maybe think sex work is. It's a convenience thing or it's a survival thing. And those people I know exist. There are a lot of people who are doing it because it's like, I make a shit ton of cash doing this and I'm good at it and I like it. And
or
that's
it's a combination.
Too. Or it's both.
I mean, a lot of us have to work to earn money. So sometimes making it also an artistic process can help that along.
I mean, I'm lucky to be in that place where I happen to really enjoy the thing that I also make quite a decent wage out of. And I think that's in the capitalist dystopia we're living through. Yeah. That's the jackpot.
That's what we got.
That's the best we can really hope for,
And when you were approaching me, were you also thinking about the kink aspects of my work? Or I don't remember that really being a part of the email. It was more...
I mean, for sure, because I think if I saw you as... I appreciated you were doing dom work and that's a particular kind of sex work. And I think I think you've mentioned in your podcasts that not everyone gets the distinction. So I think if I didn't get the distinction, it wouldn't be useful for me to have tried to help you. I do understand the distinction. I've made time and effort to learn from people who work in doming enough to recognize the kind of the boundary between the sex and the sex work.
Yeah, I'd be interested to hear what your takeaway is in terms of that. But I think I've gone through different phases. When I first walked into my first interview and they asked me whether I had ever done sex work before, I kind of looked at them blankly and was like, I don't understand. Didn't realize that sex was a part of this. But now I understand that the definition extends to the fact that we're intersecting with people's sexuality as opposed to penetrative sex.
Exactly. And I think, the thing I'd say here in terms of discussing sexuality is It's the brain that is the biggest sexual organ. And there's two meanings to that. One is that, of course, the brain is receiving all of the inputs and is actually doing something with those inputs to create an experience that we're having. So this is why touching you here or touching you there will do things. But the other is the experience that is not about touch, but is about where you are, who you're with, what you're doing. That can be arousing and exciting. This is how it's quite possible to have a no genitals involved, incredibly arousing experience that maybe even leads to, like, well, for men, ejaculation, or for women, coming. And they actually haven't touched their bodies at all. It's just been so big in their minds. And I've heard of doms and dominatrixes discussing scenes where, made him see God, so like their whole body, everything's doing everything, but my genitals weren't involved, his weren't actually necessarily. It was all about the experience that was not about that.
Yeah, but not that I have anything against penetrative sex. I've also been on that end of the industry.
I'd like to point out I love penetration too. Both directions.
But yeah, so the kink aspects of things, do you see many people who practice kink? Or is that something that even comes up?
It has done, yeah, for sure. I mean, in the time I've been working, I've only been working in practice for 5 years. So it's mainly come up in terms of, talking to some queer clients where, they're just trying to get maybe a little bit of normalization around, I do like to do this, I do want to do that. I had a couple who, a queer male couple who brought their discussion of kink and how they were trying to incorporate that. And I was just helping them do that, just normalizing it and just enabling them to talk about it, because there was a bit of I haven't asked you and I'm just afraid to ask. So just, even for people who are operating within a group where kink is maybe much more mainstream, much more normal for, check that word normal, but, much more common, even they was having to need a bit of help to just have that conversation. Kink is very widespread within the queer community. I don't feel like it's anything difficult to relate to. But I'm also aware that the menu is so big that I'm also quite comfortable being like, well, I don't know who's into that, but I'm glad that they get it, and I'm glad they get to do it, even though I don't want to do it. I'm over here doing that thing, which I like.
So in a sense, it's almost as if it didn't really matter whether it's kink or whether it's another sort of object. It's just that people are finding it hard to vocalize and normalize, or just insert it into somewhere that fits for them.
Yeah, even just conversations around, because I think kink or fetish is often turned into leather, whips, chains, domination. It's it can also just be something as simple as I'm a man and I want to be more submissive to you, which is flipping the script. Maybe I even want to wear something more feminine, just so I can really embody that. Maybe the average person doesn't look at that and think, oh, that's very kinky, but it is, because kink is all about how you are experiencing your relationship to sex and what you want to do to enhance or enjoy it even more.
Okay. And how would you define fetish then, in contrast maybe to kink?
So fetish, I'm sort of drawing on the definitions of others, although I kind of matches mine too, is when you start getting into objects or settings. And it's the objects and the settings that kind of have the sexual power. So to give an example, yes, you can wear things like leather, you can wear things like latex. It could be a setting such as, for a lot of queer men, the setting of a locker room or, a sports changing room has a lot of erotic power. It's after rugby and the guys are all wearing rugby gear. So it's that's creating the arousal. If you were conversely saying I'm with a guy and I'm like, let's pretend we're rugby players, that would be me trying to do kink, but without the fetish objects. So if I was to say that, we could try and role play it. I actually did that with one person. We were talking we did this role play scene where he sort of came in and we were talking about how we were mates at going to practice, and I hadn't been for a little while, and we were just going to watch some porn and jerk off with each other, and we're actually straight and everything. So I have done that as a kink, but then I'd much rather like put on some gear and get somewhere where we were all interacting like that.
Okay.
What do you think of the distinction?
I mean, everything is a construct and everything shifts.
For sure.
But I've come to understand that fetish is something that holds erotic power over your sexuality and is almost integrated within it. Whereas a kink can be more of an individuated experience. So somebody can have a fetish for, I don't know, like let's just say leather. And whenever they see it, they smell it, it just is, and they need it to be to have a sense of fulfillment in an ongoing fashion in some way. Whereas if you just want to experience leather as maybe a kink, maybe the scent doesn't really trigger anything, but you're going to make an effort to like start to feel into something. So I guess it's like part of your personality or not. Maybe is kind of how I've come to understand.
I mean, that's quite a good description because, for example, if you could, I mean, there's an investment opportunity here, but I mean, if you were to set up like a fake sports ground or locker room and everything, and it all looked really authentic, and the whole thing was you have to go wearing your rugby gear or your football gear and everything, and that was, I mean, there are clubs that is like wear the gear, but there's nowhere that has the whole immersion. If that existed, I'd go there a lot. But they don't really exist, so I'm just sort of stuck with my
I've seen some pretty bad locker rooms.
Yeah.
I don't think they're meaning to be locker rooms, though. It's just somewhere to store your stuff.
But I'm just trying to think about how I could separate out the really, as you say, the bit where it's like, oh my God, it's so like powerful, compelling, and I'm really drawn, and it's so meaningful to me, which I've definitely had, versus the whole like, oh, this is nice and I can lean into it.
So what are people doing when they are not quite placing it within themselves? Like they obviously are identifying with maybe a fetish or a kink, but they come to you and they're trying to place it. Like what are they usually battling, or how do they get there?
Okay, interesting. So I've actually got a client at the moment I can think of who, without going into the detail of what it is, I think is actually, on the one hand, I'm trying to say to him, can you just be okay with what you're attracted to and enjoy it and find a way to fold it into your life in a way that works for you? For him, there is a bit of an issue of he's paying for it. So that's a bit of a constraint. I think if money was no object and he's sort of saying, well, I'm looking forward to when I've got a higher salary and then I can just do it, and that won't be so much of a problem. But there's also this dynamic going on within it where the people he's trying to work with, they have to do it in a particular way. The relationship has to work in a particular way, and if it doesn't, it's an issue. But he has at the same time tried to really go into, but what is this? What does it mean? Where did it come from? Could I not have it? So he's done both in his exploration, and I don't have an agenda around that. It's not for me to tell people that their kinks should or shouldn't exist or what they should be. He brought up some things that he thought there were kinks he was really noticing he was drawn to, but he was at the same time saying, I don't feel comfortable that I like these things. And again, I just had to try to be holding of that and say, well, they just are, we don't choose our kinks, they just exist. And, to use an example that I've heard, you can, for example, be a feminist woman who, does not enjoy violence and at the same time can really get into the scene of surrendering that, going to the role play and saying to your feminist boyfriend, okay, you're going to choke me and call me a bitch and really knock me around. And we both know that this is a role play. And at the end of it, I'm going to not feel bad about what happened because I'm not like actually supporting misogyny. I just enjoyed it on my own terms.
Yeah. And I think that, maybe this is a very complex conversation, but I don't know if violence, like a violent action, like seemingly, is necessarily violence if it's something that you're choosing, right? And I don't know. I think the feminist act is in the choice.
Well, for me, that's exactly the reason why I use it as an example. Because if you're saying, I'm a woman, I don't like misogyny and I don't like violence against me that is being perpetrated. However, I can and do enjoy choosing this to happen within a confine that I have set and decided for myself. And I actually
There's
will take
power
something
in
from it.
that.
There's total power in that, yeah.
Yeah. And in terms of helping people navigate things that they find hard to place, I mean, you say that you're not there to say, like, place it or not. You're there to be a part of a process, perhaps is how I've heard it. But what if there's something that is just that you just want to not have, that it's just caused you so much grief and you just want to get rid of it?
Yeah.
Does that happen?
It's yeah, I have experienced that. It's a bit of a specific context. I'm okay to talk about it. And the client has sort of given me sort of broad permission to talk about it. So I'm able to.
You can also talk about just in general. I mean, we have histories and even current scenarios of like spaces of reformation, right? Where they try to like change people's sexualities.
Yeah. Okay.
For
So
example.
I'm going to talk about the client because I think there's an interesting reference point in that, and then I'll pivot to that. So I had one client who came to me who ultimately was initially very burdened by not being able to talk about the subject. And and there was a lot of focus on confidentiality. And by the way, like I said, this has all been negotiated, so I can talk about this. And we started talking, and the situation was, this is a man who's in his 40s now, and he had, as a child, entered into a relationship with his father that was sexual, that wasn't forced upon him, and there was no coercion. I mean, I can already hear the people, from the gallery saying, "Oh no, but this is, of course, must be have a groom situation." And he was very adamant. No, the situation was something that, yes, situations were set up where I could say I would like to do something sexual, or I'd like to do something, but I could then decline it. It was my choice, and this happened for as long as my father was into me. And there was for him a real treasuring of this memory, as he was my father and he was my lover. And no, I didn't choose this situation initially in terms of it existing, but when it happened, I did enjoy it. And he was struggling with ultimately the false consciousness he'd been given by another therapist who'd said, no, but like for a year, he went to see her and was sort of told, yeah, but I mean, let's look at it from this angle. Now, can you see that you're abused? Okay, how about now? And there was this inability to accept this experience that happened, and it was okay for the client. Now, here, he was struggling initially with, is it okay for me to have enjoyed what I enjoyed? And it was very important for me to say to him, that is not my choice. That is not my decision. It happened. I can hold simultaneously, parents should not have sex with their children, and that it happened to you, and you had a pleasurable experience that you don't want to forget and you don't want to have invalidated. So I think it's a bit of an extreme example of someone saying, I wanted this, and other people would say I shouldn't want it, but I did. The converse of this is in the same area, and it's very tragic, is when people are attracted to children, they are the sexuality that we don't have, I think, enough compassion for, where it's someone who's like a non-offending pedophile who's like, I don't want to have sex with children. It would be terrible for them. It would be terrible for me. Don't want to, help me. Like, those are the people who I feel for the most and would want to help in that area. I think anything else where there is consent between adults, I would have no interest in trying to stop this person feeling what they feel. I would get straight into, what is it about this thing that makes you feel like it has to be removed or exiled from you? Who said this? Where did this come from? What are you feeling about this? Where is the shame associated with this? Because we don't exile things we're not ashamed of. So I hope that illustration says something for you there.
Yeah, I guess like you said, it's quite an extreme example because of the ways that we see age and consent. And so there's that I'm navigating.
Yeah. And it's funny, and I hope you're okay
Oh yes,
in the
I'm okay.
information.
But then I'm also trying to navigate that in a space where maybe it has nothing to do with another individual. Like in a case of fetish. And it's just, I guess it's similar in the fact that there's so many structures set up for us to try to normalize ourselves, to try to mainstream ourselves, to try to like keep a certain way of being. And anything that deviates, it can be very hard to navigate and even feel internally okay with or without extreme examples, right? And it sounds like the way that therapy or the therapeutic approach can benefit is more for us to be able to see that process as opposed to where things should be placed.
Exactly. No, I completely agree with the way you framed that. And what I would attempt to do with someone is, and this is part of me speaking internal family systems language now, when we have a part of ourselves, whatever that part is, that is we don't accept, or the people around us, our family, our society don't accept, it's called exile. We exile it. We don't think about it. We don't want it. And it often, that part starts to accumulate shame because it's not allowed. It's not allowed to be there. So this can exist for so many people in what they desire sexually, because especially the more sex negative countries, I think Britain does okay with sex. Sometimes it has a bit of a challenging relationship with sex in terms of it being like naughty, or like people can be silly around sex. But if you think about the United States, oh my God, it's like, it's dripping in it. It's people are so conflicted to the point where they don't even know what they want. They don't even know their own sexual desire in terms of gender, for example. Like there are people who actually believe it's a choice. And the fact that I'm attracted, for example, to both men and women, well, isn't that how everyone works? We all operate that way. I just have to choose women because that's the right choice. So yeah, you are correct. I mean, like as a therapist who's practicing ethically, I have to turn up and say to my client, like, how can I help you? And if they're saying, I want to get rid of this part of me, or I don't like it, the inquiry has to be about what's happened to make you not like it. And how do I help you start to welcome that part and integrate it more? That's not me saying you then, if someone was to come with, I don't know, some powerful kink or fetish, not the extreme example, but just something they're like, I think it's wrong that I want to do this. And I'm like, well, that's distressing that you exist like this. Can we get you to a place of at least accepting that it's there, and then you can choose what you do with it in a way that's more balanced and integrated? Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I'm going to ask a question that probably you've answered in a much more elaborate way, but maybe just to bring it to a point. What is therapy for?
Yeah.
To you, or in general?
I think I'm going to speak for myself first, and before I go on to what it can be for others. The therapy that I do, because I work with internal family systems, that's all about recognizing that we are multiple. We have many different parts. Those parts have different needs, different agendas. They hold different things. Some are cognitive, some are in the body. That for me is a process of inquiry, process of welcoming, and ultimately bringing in and integrating parts that are not integrated together so that there is wholeness. So there's a connection between the individual and everything that they have. And when you can do that, that is a wonderful place to be, because you're not alienating any parts of yourself. There's no shame, there's no conflict, there's no discord. That is how I approach things. And I don't find that challenging. I seem to have some kind of strange superpower where nothing really phases me, and I don't judge things. Unless someone is hurting someone else against their will, that's my kind of ethical, kind of like one golden rule. As long as that's not happening, well, okay, well, it's fine. Where do we want to go from that? I ultimately want my clients to be fulfilled and happy and thriving. That's what, for me, therapy is supposed to achieve and create greater consciousness. I mean, ultimately, you are trying to enlarge someone's consciousness so that, and their awareness, so they can see, what parts do I have? How do they work? How did I get here? How did I get here that I hate the fact that I carry this part of me or this part of my identity? What made that happen? And how do I make sure it's not happening like that again? The wider therapy profession, I mean, this is where I have to sometimes point out that, we're not a monolith, and I don't agree with some of my colleagues. Some people take it into a direction of, well, I'm here as an expert to explain to you who you are. And I don't like that form of therapy, because then the other person is deciding which parts are kind of okay and how they work. And I don't agree with that. Some forms of therapy are very much, I'm not a person. I'm the blank screen. I'm the interpreter, and you'll just sort of bounce off this screen until you sort
impossible.
of understand yourself. I hate it. I hate this idea, because it's like, we're people. We need other people.
Well, not only that, but I mean, to be a blank, anything as an existing entity sounds completely ludicrous.
But it's part of the whole modality where, I mean, we're talking about sort of like extreme psychodynamism, and where that's the job. The job is like, I will be as little of myself as I can. I will be in the room as little as I can, so that you can see me as this mirror, and I get to help you understand what's going on for you.
How?
I agree, and that's why I don't practice that form of therapy.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
It's that's kind of very modality heavy, as opposed to what we call more relational therapy, where it's like, I'm a person, you're a person. Let's try to understand you. But I can, for example, I can bring in the therapy myself into the room. I'm one thing that I offer to people, particularly my queer and poly clients, is that I am a queer person. There are things I can bring in, examples that normalize, stabilize, help them go, oh, yes, this is my experience, but here's something that I can learn from that is common to this person's experience with mine. With the poly clients I have, sometimes they don't know what to do. And they're like, I don't know how to do poly. And I'm like, well, I'm doing poly, and here are some examples from my life. Is that helpful? And they're like, yeah, it is. Because actually, it's all fine and well to read a book, but to talk to a person about it is quite different.
I guess it depends how we like to take on information. And perhaps as people who entire lives' work is about relating, maybe therefore the concept of just having as blank a slate as possible in front of you is very unappealing. But maybe that works for some people who find relating very difficult, perhaps.
Well, there's like three of the kind of shadow archetypes of therapists that I have definitely identified so far. One is the wounded healer, the one who is trying to help others.
There's lots of those.
Yeah, it's one of the real things you have to be careful around when you're a therapist, that you're not drawn into the work to save or rescue, because as long as you're doing that, you're disempowering, and also messy stuff happens when you do that. Another is the narcissistic therapist. That is a scary person who is using the process to fulfill them, and they're not helping you. And then you have the therapy robot, who knows the jargon, knows the modality, knows the techniques, but they're not a person. They're not trying to be a person. So I put that form of work into that archetype. If you're doing it to the point where you're not even a person, you're actually saying, no, it would be best if I'm not a person. You seem very angry with me. What's happening for you? Who do I represent right now that is making you angry? Am I maybe your father? I'm like, oh, come on. No, like Freud died a long time ago. Can we just let him rest in his grave and stop doing what he never actually proved worked in the first place?
Yeah.
Sorry, all of my Freudian colleagues. You can come for me in the comments. I'm okay with it.
You can come on here and I can be confused.
Defend yourself.
Confused by your approach. I mean, in a way, I feel like I have an observer who almost has that kind of dialogue going on inside of me anyway. Like I've, especially after meditating, I've had like a split almost
Mm,
dialogue. So I have the one who is emoting. And then I'll have the one who's kind of very kind and observing and like suggesting.
mm.
Yeah. And I guess in a way, maybe that blank feedback could be a version of that, but that doesn't sound very kind.
Mm.
So,
I don't find it kind, and that's why I don't do it. But that kind of split that you're talking about, again, within internal family systems, I would just say, I'd be curious about those and say, okay, well, what's that one part saying? And does it make sense? And can you convey that it makes sense? And what about that other one? And are they working together? Are they working separately, in conflict? There's a whole process of understanding and resolving.
yeah. I think it's much faster these days in which they don't sound as distinct anymore.
Mm.
But especially when I first started meditating, there was a lot of random conversations.
Well, that happens over time. I mean, especially when you go through developmental processes that are about connecting more to the true self. This is a term we have in internal family systems. And then it's much, much easier to, relate to your parts in a way where there's more harmony, there's more wholeness. They don't seem as split and they don't seem as conflicted.
It was helpful. But I thought I was going crazy for a couple of years there.
That's very sad, though. That's common to so many people's experiences where they have the kind of the war in their head and they go, I'm going crazy. It's like, no, you just have a self that's not currently integrated, and you don't have the awareness and the consciousness and the working together. But it's something that can be achieved. I could help you do it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've mentioned the meditation thing on the podcast a few times. So maybe I'll go into what was happening for me. And I don't want to turn this into a therapy session, but just in the interest of talking about splits and they're all saying that they want to hear more conversation from me, so I'm going to inject myself also. But so what happened was that I hit the meditation pretty hard. It's called Vipassana. So that's 12 days silence, no reading, no writing, no eye contact, no blah, blah, blah. But then I did it every day for a minimum of 2 or 3 hours, and it kind of really shook. I just felt like a lot of, I think, anxieties about just existing in the world that maybe I hadn't I just pushed down basically up to that point. And I started hearing voices. I started hearing 3, and it was more just narrating the course of my life rather than any like telling me what to do or whatever. That's sometimes what people say. And I did speak to a therapist about it. And I didn't see him for very long because I had to move away from Australia. But what he kind of asked was like, were you doing anything else? So I think he was asking whether I was doing drugs at the time, which I wasn't. And then he said, well, do they bother you? And they didn't really bother me. It's just that upon reflection, I will say that I thought I was going crazy because people would say probably schizophrenia or something. But I didn't have an issue with it. And I said, well, no, not really. And he's like, well, if you don't have an issue with it, then yeah. Well, then, okay, just keep on meditating.
I mean, if you'd come to me, I would have provided you
a little bit
more context. The context that I've given you in terms of, well, this is understanding that we have parts and they work this way. And, the more...
That would have been helpful.
Yeah, that would have helpfully normalized a little bit.
I mean, what he said did help, like, in normalizing it a bit. But then, like, my Googling led me to realizing that a lot of people hear a lot of voices that are not your own kind of voice in your mind.
Yes.
I mean, they are, but they aren't. But then it reduced down to 2, and now it's like I can see the part that is being like understanding and kind, and the one that's maybe more reactive, but it's not literal voices anymore.
Yeah, and I found that once I sort of came out of my what I would consider to be, the groundwork of most of my IFS work, we reach a point in the work which is called self-leadership, where you're aware of self, you're aware of parts, everyone is kind of recognizes self is there, you're all working together internally. And at that point, it becomes very quiet, it's very still. You do hear things, you'll think things, or parts of you will address you. But yes, that kind of sense that you described of, it wasn't me, it's still you. It's
Yeah.
just that it's a part of you that you are a little less connected to. So, and when I'm doing IFS sessions with people, I'll get them to even, sometimes hold negotiating sessions with, there's like, imagine a table, imagine the parts coming in, and you're sort of facilitating a discussion between them. And that creates a lot of harmony where there can actually be a lot of discord.
How did you come to the IFS system?
Oh, through my own therapy. I was seeing a therapist who had seen me and my partner for couples therapy. We really needed it at the time. I then came back to him and said, I'd had an incredibly bad experience with a therapist. I actually walked out of the room after he made me cry, and I know the difference between I'm crying because I'm distressed from my material. I was training to be a therapist, to you are actually making me cry and you have no compassion for the fact that you're doing this. I walked out of the room, didn't go back. And so I trusted this therapist, said, could I help? Could I have some help? And he all he did was say, I've got a process called IFS. Would you be interested in using it? He didn't explain what it was. And in the next session, I did it, and I had a particularly powerful experience. It's something that's called direct access, where sometimes a part that's very, very dominant is actually kind of like running things, and you don't have the awareness to know it. And this happens to a lot of people, by the way, especially people who are like very high functioning, very educated, very striving. They often have very rational or very striving parts that are actually running things, and they think it's them, it's not them. So I had this rational part talking, and my therapist started talking directly to it. Eventually it's sort of bypassing me, talking to it, having this conversation. He asked, how old do you think Ali is? And it says he's 26, because that's where it was stuck in my development. And I kind of understand the reasons for that now. And afterwards I sort of like, what the hell was that? And he was like,
sounds
yes,
that's
creepy.
Cool.
It is. It does seem creepy. It seems very, very weird. Yeah. But that's a sign of kind of something's kind of gone wrong. A part has had to barge you aside and take over and run everything, because it's like things are survival. So bad, I have to do it. It was survival, exactly. And that was part of it was really the first step in a healing journey that no other therapy had provided to me. So yes, I'm here to shill IFS. It is the best kind of therapy I've ever experienced, and that's why I've devoted my career to it.
And this is what you apply to everybody who comes to see you these
days? Not everyone.
Okay.
I mean, it's my main modality.
Okay.
There's different ways of working with it. You can do it sort of surface, just saying, well, it sounds like a part of you feels like this, but it sounds like another part of you is kind of, and just illustrating that there are different perspectives going on, and that's okay. It isn't schizophrenic. It's not crazy. And then starting to elicit a bit of information out of that. That's sort of like surface level. And then there's a deeper level where you can sort of go inside, talk to the parts, interview them. The parts can actually communicate what they are thinking. It can feel a bit strange initially, but once you sort of start to experience it, it's like, well, yeah, this is actually happening to me, and I'm learning stuff, and this is really meaningful. And then someone comes with crazy levels of anxiety, it's really distressing, and then the anxiety explains to them why it's doing what it's doing and what it is really afraid of and why it can't stop doing it. And this person's like, oh my God, this part that I've hated since I've experienced this, I now really understand and I really get, and oh my God, it's awful. This poor part is having to yell at me all the time. Scary. And it doesn't even work, and suddenly this person has compassion for this part and wants to actually help it out of this awful role that it's found itself in. And that's where the healing starts to begin.
It's amazing the segments that we can create in order to be able to live.
Yeah, very much. And those parts, we call them protectors. They develop in response to trauma. You have a traumatic event, you couldn't handle it, and a part of you that's not very sophisticated will pop up saying, I will do my best to make sure that doesn't happen again. You were humiliated as a child. I will yell at anyone who I have the slightest perception is making you feel humiliated, even when it's not happening. That's my trauma. My trauma sees humiliation. I will yell at you and make you go away. Yeah. Well, not you. I think that would go well. That would go well.
Yeah.
But does that make sense? That
yes,
sort of
no,
interplay?
Absolutely. absolutely. But yeah, I mean, I just powered through and I kept meditating and I dipped into therapists where I could along the way. And eventually I feel like I've gotten to a good spot. But yeah, it would have been helpful. It would have been faster, a little faster, perhaps.
Yeah. But we met eventually.
Yes, thank you. But is there anything else that you'd like to mention? I guess I would be curious to hear maybe a little bit about kink and fetish and where, I mean, I feel like it's helped me understand ways of communicating and my own desire and senses of satisfaction and seeing desire within other people. But I guess from your perspective, how do you see the placement of kink and fetish in a mind or in a life?
So in life, I think they're great.
Uh-huh.
They're great. Kink and fetish are amazing.
I think they're fun.
They're wonderful fun. As long as you have a relationship with them where you are accepting and you're not trying to, dissociate from them and say, oh no, they're not okay to have, they're great. So first of all, if there's a problem you have with them, work through that because they're not going anywhere. You can't unkink or unfetish something. It doesn't work. And I'm drawing here from the book Perv by Jesse Bering. It's a great read. And he is similarly drawing from a lot of the literature around this, where, first of all, we don't know why we get kinks or fetishes. We don't understand it. We can theorize, but we never actually know. We don't know the mechanism by which they develop. We don't seem to understand that either. We have some theories that it's power structures that seem to create them. Because if we look at hunter-gatherer societies where there is no power structure, they don't seem to have anything like that. They just have sex. So there's something about that. And definitely he communicated in his book, kink, fetish, as long as it's being done consensually, as long as you are enjoying what you are doing, again, removing the shame from it, it's totally healthy. There's nothing wrong with it. And people who practice kink, we have a lot of research that shows that especially when they're doing things with other people, particularly where there's something, any kind of level of risk at all, there has to be communication, there has to be understanding, there has to be consent. And actually these people who are practicing this are doing this more frequently and a lot better than people who just sort of drunkenly throw themselves into bed and then stuff happens that actually maybe wasn't so good for either party.
Mm-hmm. And why do you think people struggle to place it?
Sex negativity. It's again, it's in our society. There's also, I've had conversations with people where there's almost some kind of I don't think we have a term for it, but it's like, wouldn't it be better if I just enjoyed missionary sex with the lights off?
No.
No, and I don't think so either. But it's in a way that you have heteronormativity that says, isn't it, it's better that you be a straight person with a heterosexual person. There seems to be this. There seems to be wouldn't it just be best if that's what's going on for you?
Wouldn't it be easier for me and my experience?
Well, actually, I heard a porn star who was talking on a podcast once, and he's a very famous one. He's like a Cade Maddox. He's a very big gay porn star. And they were asking him, so what are you into? And they were expecting, I think, some really elaborate answer. And he was like, I'm pretty vanilla. I just like fucking a lot of hot people. And I was like, yeah, go for it. And,
good job.
And he's doing a great job. But at the same time, he's someone who he was sort of said, I'm still developing. I'm still working out what I'm into. I'm in my early 30s. He's done films with trans men. So he's actually had sex with men with vaginas and found that really, really good. And I think that's something that his sort of younger gay self would probably maybe not have been as into. And I definitely know for myself. I mean, I moved from, I can speak to this very specifically. I moved from a Kinsey 6, I'm totally gay, I don't have any attraction to women, to a Kinsey, I'd say 5.
This is a scale?
Yeah, this is Alfred Kinsey created this in the 60s when he did his research on sex. He was like, no, it's not gay and straight. There's a scale of 0, 100% heterosexual, to 6, 100% homosexual. And then there's these gradations on the way. So it's a dimmer switch. It's not a light switch, it's a dimmer switch, to quote a comedian. And I had to do some work around actually saying to myself, and you know, this is a live example of, I think, what you're asking. My example here is, in therapy, I had to come to peace with at peace with the fact that as a teenager, I came out very young. I was very bullied and harassed, tried to commit suicide. It was so bad. It was a really horrific experience. Queer people were second-class citizens. People would say that to my face. It was an awful experience. And a part of me was saying, if you are not gay, if you actually are anything other than that, you have thrown that teenager who suffered through that under the bus. And you cannot do that. And I had to go through the process of working with that part and saying, no, what he experienced was real and it's tragic and meaningful, but it was true for him then. But I'm allowed to be fluid and evolve and recognize that I have different feelings maybe now than I did. I don't know that I do. Can I at least allow myself to try? And the part eventually was willing to let me. Watched a lot of straight porn and started really actually exploring what I enjoyed or what I didn't enjoy, and eventually had my first sexual experience with a woman, and I did really enjoy it. But I have less sexual attraction to women than I do to men. So here you have a live example of, it can just sometimes take a lot of understanding what is preventing me from going to this or allowing me to place this in my experience. For me, the shame was, conversely, being straight.
You'd be betraying your younger self.
Yeah, being straight would be a betrayal.
Yeah, society has a lot to answer for.
Totally does.
But is there anything else that you'd like to add before I close? Thank you so much. That was a wonderful journey through possibility and belonging.
I think just to say thank you so much for inviting me here. I said at the beginning, before we started recording, that I found my life to be a wonderful roller coaster that I'm riding, and this interview with you in your place of work is a nice little loop that I have done.
Thank you. I hate the upside down part on a roller coaster. I'm happy for you. That's what you're into.
You just go through it.
Just in there. Upside down, I don't know. I'm just here all the time. But thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you for listening.
Thanks, everyone.